Hello guys, Crispy here, welcome back to another video. In this one, my friends, I'm going to be testing a GeForce RTX 4070 Ti in Alan Wake 2. This one is the Palette Game Rock Midnight Kaleidoscope version of the card. We are running it with the latest NVIDIA drivers and I'm not manually overclocking it. You can see all of its specs right here in Tech Power-Ups. GPU Z resizable bar is also enabled and we got 12 gigs of GDDR6X to work with. And over on the left, we're pairing it with the i5-13600K overclocked to 5.5 GHz and 32 gigabytes of DDR5 6000 MHz RAM in dual channel. Let's get into it, shall we? Let's go over the settings first. I'm starting at 1080p resolution and we're also going to test this one at 1440p and 4K. DLAA is what we're utilizing right here, but I'm also going to use some DLSS options a little bit later, and frame generation is turned off, but obviously I'm going to check that out later as well. Over on the quality settings, we're using the high preset. It's not maxed out, as you can see right here. Some things could go higher. I did max it out on the 4080. It was extremely intensive, but I recommend high instead, okay? At least with the 4070 Ti. Ray tracing is turned off, and I'm also going to check that out later. And as you can see, my friends, we're actually getting very respectable FPS for the 4070 Ti. I mean, this is 1080p resolution, and I would probably expect these kinds of FPS at 1440p max settings instead, but we gotta remember that this game looks insane, aside from the soft visuals at 1080p resolution. But that's to be expected because I'm using a 4K monitor right here, you know? But yeah, not only does this game look insane, but it also utilizes some software-based ray tracing, even when you have ray tracing turned off. That's why it is so intensive, and it also looks really, really good. So yeah, given the new technologies that this game supports and runs with out of the box, I think 100 frames per second on average is pretty damn good. Also, compared to the optimized PS5 settings that I played with the RTX 3060 Ti and the RX 6700 XT, actually, it was a little bit above the PS5 settings. We don't really see noise whatsoever, even in the water and stuff, which is quite nice. Also, I just discovered right now, if you have the flashlight enabled, as you can see, you actually do lose a few FPS, like 1 or 2%, I guess. Look at that. Yeah, 99 to 104 frames per second, that's the difference. So I'm gonna run around with the flashlight on from now on. Now, what if you really want a high refresh rate experience? Let's try it out with frame generation enabled, still with DLAA, and here we can actually get those sweet 144 plus all of the time. Also, do keep in mind that I am doing this in one of the most intensive areas, if not the most intensive area in the entire game. Once you reach the city, after this part over here, it will actually improve your FPS by a little bit, like 10 to 15% basically. Now, the DLSS frame generation in this game also looks really good compared to native resolution. It's slightly, very, very slightly softer, but it doesn't really bother me too much, and if you are running a native 1080p monitor, it should look really good still. And the smoothness is, of course, gonna be much, much better on a high refresh rate panel once again, because now we're constantly above like 140 frames per second, and over here in this little corridor area, it's actually the most intensive part of my little benchmark run over here, just running around the woods, you know? So yeah, seeing like 140 minimum there is kind of insane. Like, frame generation is some really decent technology. Okay, 1080p was really easy to run, so let's bump it up to 1440p native using DLAA, no frame generation, and the same high settings preset right here with no ray tracing. And ooh, it's so much more intensive, as you can see. So instead of getting like 100 frames per second, we're down into the 60s, guys. This is really intensive, but it also looks way better on my 4K monitor. Like, if you're still running a 1080p monitor with one of these 40 series GPUs, I mean, with the latest titles being so intensive, you might think, well, it's actually a good pair, but once you go 1440p and see the visuals that it provides compared to 1080p, it's such a big difference. And there are some really good 1440p monitors out there now during Black Friday. I would say, like, with a 4070 and up, you should probably utilize 1440p, guys. Even if you need to utilize like DLSS sometimes to achieve 60 plus all of the time in some of the titles, it's totally worth it. It's still gonna look better than 1080p at native resolution. Anyways, guys, it hasn't really dropped from 60 FPS, has it? 1% lows are at 56, but it's just because of some little, very, very tiny variations in the frame time graph, which you cannot notice whatsoever. It feels really, really smooth with these FPS. Yeah, it's only when you drop down into like the 40s that it starts, god damn it, it starts feeling a little bit jittery because the game has some issues with frame pacing at lower FPS, but at 60 plus all of the time, it feels pretty damn good, especially if you lock the FPS. And that's it, 67 FPS average was what we got here at native 1440p using high settings. That's pretty alright, you know, but what if you want to be comfortably above 60 FPS the entire time? Because there will be some scenarios where it will definitely dip into the 50s since we were so close to 60 FPS at times. Now, that's where DLSS comes in, and once again, guys, on quality, this looks way better than 1080p native resolution did. Some things are slightly more shimmery, but in this particular title, at least, DLSS works really, really well. It's basically the same as native resolution. You can't really tell much of a difference whatsoever. Maybe inside of vegetation like this, it will be a little bit fuzzier, but you're not really going to do that very often, I guess, and if you're not really looking for the imperfections, you ain't going to find them. Remember when I told you that I expected around 100 FPS coming from a 4070 Ti at 1440p maximum settings? Well, this is still not maximum settings, of course, but it is getting 100 FPS with high settings preset, which is the highest preset in the game, and with visuals that are very similar to native 1440p with the use of DLSS. So, you know what? I would probably just play like this. And you know what? If you lock the FPS now to 60, it will consume even less power than locking the FPS at native resolution. So that is quite insane, my friends. It could be very, very power efficient when you do that. You know what? I'm actually going to try that out. And with 60 FPS locked, look at that power consumption, guys. 180 watts right now. For these visuals, it looks very beautiful indeed. Holy crap, see that? This is really nice efficiency, and you should definitely lock your FPS if you're playing a single-player title with a GPU like this. I think it's totally worth saving like 100 watts of power or so. Maybe a little bit less, but yeah. Anyway, let's unlock the FPS once again, because, of course, if you want the best smoothness experience, you'll want to do that. But with frame generation, things might change, my friends. It will probably reach those insane FPS once again, maybe like 150s or so. I'll still keep quality DLSS enabled because it will look pretty much the same as DLAA with the frame generation enabled. Yeah, I can see a little bit more shimmering once again on these bushes and stuff and the branches, but we're back into the 140s, guys. And things still feel snappy because we're well above 100 frames per second in terms of input lag, you know. It feels okay for a single player title. It's perfect, actually. And now you can once again take advantage of a high refresh rate panel at 1440p. That's pretty crazy, isn't it? Let's see it inside of here, actually. Okay, I wish the flashlight was a little bit stronger in this game, guys. Outside, you can't see it whatsoever. Oh my god, what the hell was that? I heard something. Anyway, yeah, up to like 160s sometimes. And outside, with all of the vegetation, that's pretty intensive. Getting 140s and 130s at times. This is buttery smooth right now, guys. And you know what? I am seeing those little shimmering differences because I'm on a huge 42-inch monitor, so I can tell all of the little imperfections coming from like native resolution to quality DLSS to frame generation. But if you are on a 27-inch monitor at 1440p, which I do recommend, like that's the perfect size for 1440p, by the way, you won't really be able to tell much of a difference. Like, it will look really, really crispy and beautiful still. So that's great to see. You know, you can get 140 plus FPS average with 120, 1% lows. That's actually crazy with the kind of fidelity that this game has in terms of graphics. Wow. But what about 4K resolution, my friends? Native using the LAA, no frame generation again, and still on the high settings. This will definitely be below 60. Oh boy, and quite a bit below 60 it is indeed. Damn, that is pretty intensive compared to 1440p. 4K is kind of like diminishing returns area, because at 27 inches especially, you can tell the difference between a 1440p monitor and a 4K monitor, but I mean, it's a small difference and you should definitely go with 1440p. Now, in terms of VRAM, it's still enough to max out this game, well, to run it at high settings, actually, not max it out. And 4K resolution, you can see that the VRAM usage is under control. RAM usage is only at 10 gigabytes, which is normal for this game. Sometimes it's a little bit lower, but yeah, it's not really stuttering or anything, but you can probably tell the little frame skipping issues right here. It's not a completely smooth experience in terms of turning the camera around and stuff. It kind of seems like it is stuttering, even though it is not in the frame time graph. That's something that's been here since the release of Alan Wake 2, and I don't know why they haven't fixed it yet. But as I told you, whenever you are below like 60 FPS or 50 frames per second, you can notice that quite a bit. The way to get around that is just to lock your FPS to 30. Since we didn't really drop from 30 FPS, it's always going to stay at 30 all of the time. And it will be a smooth 30 FPS, you know, it won't have these jitters all over the place when you're turning the camera around and stuff. So if you're into that cinematic-ish experience with 30 FPS, maybe add a little bit of motion blur, you know, for a single-player title, I guess it's fine. I would obviously go for 60 plus instead at 1440p, but you do you. If you prefer to connect this to a TV, for example, and play with high settings still, the 4070 Ti will be able to run it just at 30 FPS. Now, enabling quality DLSS here at 4K resolution sets it to 1440p internally, and this will run a lot better. As you can see, we're now in the 60s, although this is low 60s, so it's probably going to drop from 60. It's actually not bad considering that, once again, this is one of the most intensive areas in the game, and it's only slightly dropping from 60 FPS every once in a while. Like, we've seen a couple of dips already into the high 50s, and over here I'm expecting like mid 50s. Yep, there we go. Not the end of the world, guys. I mean, this is a playable experience for sure, and way better than the 30 FPS that we were seeing just by using DLSS quality. And this also looks pretty much the same as native resolution. Like, even at 42 inches, enabling quality DLSS compared to DLAA in this game in terms of visual fidelity at 4K, I'm gonna say it's the same, guys. I cannot tell a difference. I'm still feeling a little bit of those frame skips sometimes when it dips below 60 FPS, so at 50-ish frames per second it's still gonna happen. That's a little bit of a shame, but here we go, that's over. 62 FPS on average, 1% lows of 52. Now I'm gonna try DLSS frame generation right now at 1440p. And okay, it's enough to put us above 60 FPS the entire time, apparently. We're getting 80s right now. But the thing is, the input lag is kind of the same as... No, it's not the same as 60. I'm gonna say it's the same as like 50 FPS. So you can actually tell the difference between like native 80 frames per second and frame generation 80 frames per second. It's not the end of the world. Again, in a single-player title like this, it's not gonna matter, actually. I would actually take the smoothness, guys, over the input delay. I don't care, you know? Like, it's not a fast-paced shooter or anything, so I'm fine with this experience. But keep in mind, the FPS that you're seeing on the counter do not translate into the FPS that you feel moving the camera around, or the mouse around, actually. Obviously, it goes without saying that outside of this area, it's going to be a little bit better, maybe touching like 90 or 100 FPS at times, and it's going to feel a bit smoother as well. But what if you want real 80 FPS? That's where performance DLSS comes in. 1080p is the render resolution now, and then it's going to upscale it to 4K. DLSS frame generation is turned off at the moment, and there we go. It gets very similar FPS to what we just saw with frame generation. Damn, that's really, really close, actually. I didn't think it would be this close, guys. And since this is DLSS and it's upscaling the image from 1080p to 4K, it actually looks really good. Like, I can tell some things are way more shimmery. Like, this time, you can actually tell a lot of differences compared to quality DLSS or native resolution with DLAA. But I mean, it still looks really good, and I think on a 32-inch monitor, for example, it's not going to be very, very noticeable, and you're going to have a great time with performance DLSS. But yeah, this is the way, my friends, if you want to get 60 plus 100% of the time and play on a 4K monitor. Even on a 4K TV, it will look really, really nice, like at 55 inches or 65 inches. If you're sitting far away from the TV, you ain't gonna notice that much of a shimmering, you know? But seeing these FPS without frame generation makes me think, can we get a high refresh rate experience with DLSS frame generation and performance DLSS at the same time? Well, yeah, it seems like the gains at 4K res by using frame generation are not as big as the gains at lower resolutions. And that's to be expected. On stuff like 4080 and 4090, you can actually expect huge gains at the higher resolutions because the bandwidth on those cards is much higher, of course, and the raw power as well. But here with 4070 Ti, and especially like 4070, 4060 Ti, you don't really see that big of a difference when applying frame generation at these higher resolutions. Thankfully, the 4070 Ti still shows a bit of a difference, actually, and remember the shimmering that I was telling you about on performance DLSS? It's like it's minimized right now because the picture is slightly softer with frame generation on. I could say it looks slightly better probably for some people. If you don't like jagged edges, this will work very well. Alright. Okay, just out of curiosity, guys, I went to try it out at 1080p with performance, DLSS, and frame generation on top of it, still with the high settings, just to see how high we can go here. Holy crap, okay. We can get 200 FPS plus, basically. Jesus. But of course, like this, it's looking really rough. I would never, ever do this, but I was just curious because I swapped from 4K to 1080p and just left these settings as they were at 4K, and yeah, this is what we get. But it's time now to test it with ray tracing, my friends. We're at 1080p native now with high settings, and I'm gonna do like medium ray tracing. High ray tracing a bit too much, path tracing is set to high there, and medium ray tracing I think looks really good still. Yeah, it gets a bit rough here. I think you'd need to lock the FPS to like 30 or 35 to not see the little jerkiness when you're moving the mouse and stuff, like the little stops basically. So yeah, I would not do this at native resolution. This is how intensive ray tracing is. See, we left everything the same here and just applied medium ray tracing, and we went from 100 FPS to 40. That's crazy, right? But of course, we do have DLSS to work with, and on quality, we're getting 60s, guys. All right, that's much better. I'm gonna run around like this for a little bit. Maybe we can even get like 69 FPS on average. That would be great. But I don't think so. It's actually gonna be closer to the lower 60s, I believe. Especially in that little area with the water. But yeah, once again, this is 1080p. I'm not sure if a lot of people are playing at 1080p with a 4070 Ti. Probably most people with this GPU are playing at 1440p, and well, this is kind of pointless to test it with RT at 1080p, but it's where it shines the most. Let's be real here. Like 60 FPS-ish is pretty good. Quality DLSS at 1080p still looks decent enough. You know, it's a little bit softer once again, but in this game there's not that big of a difference because it's already soft at native. And yeah, it's smooth and it's very, very playable like this. Let's try it with frame generation at 1080p now. Alright, we're back to 100 plus. But at 1080p, once again, it's just, you can see quite a lot of visual imperfections here. And it gets way too soft with frame generation on, plus DLSS. So I think we might want to disable DLSS, actually, and just use DLAA and frame generation on top of it. it drops the FPS by a lot, guys. Yeah, and the input lag, although not terrible by any means, because it's still above 60 FPS, the input lag is there. You can notice it once again. It's around like 80 FPS, I guess, on average. Okay, let's try it at 1440p with ray tracing enabled. This is gonna be bad. Oh, it looks so gorgeous, though. But yeah, it's already dropping into the 20s, guys. And this is the target resolution for this card, of course, but if you really want RT, you already know you gotta use DLSS and frame generation sometimes as well on top of it. So with DLSS quality, things are actually pretty decent compared to native resolution. You can get like 40 plus FPS all of the time just by looking at the frames right here, but I think where it's gonna shine the most is with frame generation on top of it. And there we go, now we're above 60. Yeah, I would definitely use FG here in this situation as well. Once again, the input delay is there, but I value smoothness a little bit more in a single-player game like this one. So I would just use these settings with ray tracing if I really wanted to play with RT. Again, I don't. So I would just disable RT altogether and have an even better experience in terms of smoothness. But if you want to have that, like, really good lighting, really good shadow representation, and accurate as well, I can't deny this is a really compelling option. Oh, getting down into the 60s, guys. I saw 69 right there for a second. Oh, there we go. Once again, look in that direction. Yeah, it gets a little bit wrecked when you dip down into the 60s and lower 70s. You can definitely feel a ton of input lag, which is not great, really. But again, on a controller, for example, it would be fine. And lastly, 4K resolution is here with... Should we try it at native? Oh my god, no. I shouldn't have done that. Okay. Oh boy, alright, it completely ran out of VRAM at the moment, guys. RAM usage just filled up a lot. VRAM usage went down. Oh my god, it's still filling up almost to 17 gigabytes. Well, let's check it out, actually. Why not, since we're here. Yeah, this is it, guys. This is 4K native with ray tracing. It's just not gonna happen. Let's go with performance DLSS, since it worked quite well in terms of visuals previously, okay? So this is rendering the game at 1080p, but if you remember, even at 1080p native, it wasn't really getting that good FPS, like 40s. And over here, it's just a little bit more intensive than that. But hey, it looks great, actually, and it feels all right. Again, I would just lock it to 30 FPS and that would be fine. The DLSS is such a game changer, guys. Like, we went from 11 FPS to 30 plus with a minor hit to visuals. That is crazy, actually. But let's enable frame generation on top of it, and okay. Ooh, no. Maybe it's still applying? Wait, I'm gonna wait a little bit, guys. Okay, it's fully applied now, getting 50s. Ooh, now you can see the frame skipping issue or frame pacing issue very clearly, right? It is stuttering quite a bit, or at least it's like it's stuttering quite a bit, but it's not really stuttering because it's not showing up in the frame time graph. Yeah, this is terrible, basically. The input lag right now is pretty much the same as like 30 FPS or even lower sometimes. That's been it for this video. I think we've covered pretty much every setting that I find acceptable or adequate for a 4070 Ti. Some of them were more intensive, of course. Some of them were less intensive. But yeah, we got a bunch of settings here tested today. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. And I'll catch you in the next one very soon. As always, love you all. Bye-bye.